Thanks a lot, Yusra. I've got the pleasure of chairing this wonderful session called Organizing Change Through Technology. And it seems as though we have three very exciting presentations that I personally look forward to hearing. And so Yusra just mentioned the game plan. We'll take each of the presentations in turn. I think we'll do like 15 minutes presentations or so. So if you could keep an eye on the time, because that will allow us for some discussion. So I think the ideal format is where we have 10 minutes of plenum discussion after each presentations, and then hopefully we'll get 10-15 minutes at the end for sort of drawing common connections and stuff like that. Please, if you want to pose questions, feel free to just turn on your microphone. I think we're so few that should be possible. And if you have an unstable internet connection or just don't want to turn on your microphone, you are also welcome to write in the chat. So I'll keep an eye on the chat as well. All right, but I think that's it for now. The first presentation is by Vasilis Niadas, and if I'm not completely mistaken, you are from the Open University of Catalonia, right? Yes.
Yes.
Welcome. If you have a presentation to share, feel free to share your screen. Otherwise, just go ahead.
Sure. I'll try to share my screen now. Can you see my screen?
Yes, indeed.
Okay, so great. So my name is Vasilis Niaros, and today I will present you an action research project that has been developed by P2P Lab, which is a research collective based in Greece. So this project presents a convivial technology development framework using the concept of cosmolocal production, and the latter captures the dynamic of dispersed technology initiatives which exhibit conceptualizations of living, working, and making around the commons. In this setting, instead of overproduction and profit-oriented activities, the socio-ecological well-being is prioritized. From the vantage point of a cosmolocal initiative that we participated in, we will provide you an empirical account of its conception along with its organizational development. Finally, through the intersection of the commons and connectivity enhancing technologies, we will explore the potential for activity across various spatial levels. So, cosmolocal production builds on the convergence of digital commons with local manufacturing technologies. The latter can be found in community-led spaces like maker spaces and fab labs. And so we can call this way of producing design global, manufacture local. In this setting, all design, knowledge, and software is produced as digital commons, while manufacturing takes place locally, having local biophysical conditions in mind. Just to give you an example of how this productive model works, small-scale farmers can rarely find appropriate machinery for their work. So a community in France decided to design and build their own machinery for their work, and they shared the designs as digital commons. So this means that everyone with access to the internet and localized manufacturing technologies, they can build the tools locally and adapt it based on their needs. This is what two communities, one from the US and one from Greece, did, and they are manufacturing such tools locally. And this also is a kind of a trigger of collaboration between these communities. It is this Greek community that I will elaborate on now, which is called Zoomakers. Zoomakers is both a makerspace in the mountainous area of Epirus in Greece, as well as a community which collaboratively designs and produces solutions on small-scale agriculture. The idea of Jumakers has been instigated by the P2P Lab, which is a collective of researchers and activists who are conducting research on the intersection of open source technologies, peer-to-peer practices, and the commons. So we used the Jumakers as a pilot application of our cosmolocal framework. The first step to develop this makerspace and community was to communicate the idea to the locals in the surrounding areas through the organization of focus groups. These focus groups took place also in villages, but also in the biggest city in the area, which is Ioannina. Those gatherings were populated with people from different backgrounds, like activists, academics, but also, of course, farmers and designers. So in those gatherings, these people had the opportunity to give a first idea of what kind of needs they had in relation to agricultural production. So a first kind of documentation took place. But also we discussed what kind in which ways we could collaborate with them. The main outcome of this gathering was the creation of a core group of individuals who were willing to participate actively in the establishment of the makerspace. So the next challenge was to co-design the makerspace along with its working areas, like the wood workshop and the metal workshop. And we also had to agree with the locals which is the appropriate machinery that would someone could find in the space. This included both low-tech tools as well as tools for digital fabrication like 3D printers and microcontrollers. So a few weeks later, the two-floor building of Jumakers was ready to operate with the main workshops, as you can see in these photos. And at that point, we had, let's say, a critical mass of people along with some tangible outcomes, and we were ready to start spreading the message to more people and start widening the community. This primarily took place from mouth to mouth from the existing members of the community at that time. But one of the main tools that we used in order to expand the community was through the realization of workshops. The aim of those workshops was to to design and manufacture solutions for agricultural production collectively with the participation of the locals. And some of, let's say, the tools that were have been mostly used and produced in Jumakers, you can see them, is like a mechanical press, a mobile chicken coop, a grinder for aromatic plants, and a solar dryer for fruits. What is important to highlight is that these technologies have been developed by activating both the local and the international network of Jumakers. So on the first level, we had the participation of the locals with the backgrounds that I already mentioned, when they came and they shared their skills and knowledge on the local context. But also we have been inviting makers and designers from other similar spaces, mostly from Europe, to visit us as Jumakers and share their knowledge with us in those workshops. As you can see, the network of Jumakers is mostly expanding in the so-called global north, but it's important to highlight that we have made also attempts to test the cosmolocal framework in the global south, and we tried to do that by recruiting an individual in Bhutan, and he with his team, they have been starting to implement and build a similar space like Jumakers in Bhutan, and in this setting we are exchanging information experience from Jumakers and vice versa. So while we can say that this core group of Jumakers consists the open source agriculture movement. However, these initiatives have been using and sometimes improving commons that have been produced by other movements, like the free and open source software movement. Zoomakers have been using the Apache web server as well as WordPress. We have been using open hardware like Raspberry Pis and Arduinos. And lastly, we are using open license like the Creative Commons licenses. So we can see that there is a wider network of initiatives collaborating in this network, either directly or indirectly, synchronously or asynchronously. So from this experience of ours, we came to see that there are some opportunities. Firstly, related to environmental sustainability, tools are designed with longevity in mind. Furthermore, there is a push for use of local materials, despite the fact that some materials are impossible to obtain locally. And last, repair and reuse are prioritized with recycled materials and shared infrastructure to reduce costs and eventually reduce the environmental footprint. Regarding organizational and social sustainability, we see that there are more inclusive governance models applied in such initiatives with less transaction costs and hierarchies, while there is also a value inclusive organization where the commons act as a universal language. On the contrary, we see two major challenges faced in this setting, and the first one has to do with the digital design commons. It is very difficult even for the expert to manage and use these vast, scattered, and often poorly documented commons. And one of the main reasons for that is that there is no standardized way of documenting and sharing a solution as a commons. Further, for the non-expert, sometimes it's very difficult to understand what they read in the blueprints, and also sometimes the local manufacturing can be problematic, for example, by producing dysfunctional objects and waste. The second major challenge has to do with makerspaces themselves. They usually operate in a gray area regarding labor and legal security. And this happens because there are no standardized protocols on how to organize such safe and effective workshops. So these workshops are organized under questionable conditions concerning security of participants and legal entities. In all, we can say that Zoomakers cannot provide a solution that can be easily copy-pasted everywhere. However, this process of collaborating and sharing should be adapted to the local contexts. To conclude, this combination of human creativity and sharing, we can say that it provides a foundation for the deep connection across different localities. Thank you very much and hope to see you at some point at Zoomakers.
Thank you very much, Vasilis. That was super interesting and right on time. You can hardly ask for more, I guess. I will start by opening up for questions. Are there anyone who has any questions for Vasilis and co-authors? So feel free to write the question in the chat or raise your hand or just simply turn on your microphone. Vasilis, I was wondering, could you sort of expand a little bit on sort of the research projects more generally? Is it sort of a larger project you're doing on these makerspaces, and what other sort of aspects have you been looking at?
Yeah, so the Zoomakers project, we can say that was triggered by, let's say, smaller projects. So we as a collective, we were interested in the idea of the design global manufacture local productive model. So before getting the available funds of establishing a makerspace, we tried with other ways by visiting other initiatives that were more mature than ours and see whether that productive model was applied there, under which conditions it worked or not. And at some point, we managed to get some European funding from research projects, including an ERC project and other Horizon 2020 projects, which allow us to acquire the equipment. And with the help of the local authorities, like the municipality where the makerspace is established, they provided us with a space So we had the opportunity to create our own pilot and test our ideas there. So this wasn't easy because, it's when you have to deal with a European funding, there are certain requirements coming with them. So sometimes there's no much flexibility, but I think that somehow we managed to, at least up to now, to get some insights from this experience. And we are looking forward for the next years, COVID-free, to be able to start with the workshops again and get even more insights.
Great. Sounds wonderful. Congratulations on the grant and the project overall. Katja, you raised your hand.
Yes, thanks a lot, Vasilis. I have been following the work on cosmolocalism with a great interest. So I have kind of two questions, which I will try to frame fairly quickly. So one is, how explicitly politicized are the tool makers, and are they anti-capitalist, for example? And also, is there a kind of possibility of co-optation and how to avoid it? So that was question number one. And the second one is from the kind of, let's say, the environmental considerations from de Croo's stance. This is where also kind of my work lies. So kind of when discussing the kinds of materials that are being used. So you do say that, sometimes it is this ad hoc manufacturing and it's not so easy to find this materials. So are there some kind of perhaps similar groups or communities that produce materials in this way, which also help to reduce, let's say, the energy and material throughput more generally? So yeah, that was question number two.
Okay. Thank you very much for your questions. They're easy. It's not easy to answer those questions, but I can explain the way that we see these things. So first of all, on our side, from the P2P Lab perspective, let's say it is clear where we are standing and whether we are anti-capitalist and what we believe. But our idea when starting the pilot and our first aim was to, let's say, start a community. And we didn't want to start a community that would be characterized by something. So our first aim was to communicate the idea, and we focused more on, let's say, the idea of cosmolocalism and what can be achieved through this process. So I think that we didn't intentionally highlight, let's say, the political side of the project, because we had people from different backgrounds joining, and some of them were very skeptical even when they heard that this project is funded by the European Union. So we had to face all these kind of challenges, and our approach was to, instead of, let's say, making clear where we stand, because after all, Zoomakers is not about us. We are there to facilitate the creation of the community. Then it is up to the community to decide what kind of character that community will have and what will follow. Of course, there are values within this productive model, which if are not followed, then we will come up with something else. And as long as the P2P Lab is there funding and being responsible also on the legal side for the pilot, we have to make sure that these values are up to a point followed. And first of all, understood by the community, because it's not that easy as for us who are working on these areas. And this has also to do with the second question that you made. I think it's somehow related. We are constantly looking for collaboration with other groups, as you saw on the network, with similar initiatives. And of course, people who are, let's say, more close to us politically, it's easier for them to engage and to offer more time. They are more motivated to participate in these projects. Unfortunately, on this, let's say, in the surrounding areas, we don't have initiatives working that much on material, but we have understood the importance of this aspect. That's why in early August, we have organized a workshop, and we will bring some experts from other initiatives, to bring us their knowledge, and also to the local community, and hopefully start being more active with local materials as well. I don't know if I covered your questions.
May I jump in here? Because
of course.
Building on Katja's question and Billy's answer, it is rather tricky, as Billy said, because this is a region which is quite mountainous and people don't really vocalize their political ambitions in the same language that we typically doing research in that field do. But I would say that there is a certain political kinship, and even though we are accepting of people who's not particularly not lefty, let's say, in that sense, they do embrace the overall ambition of the project, and that does relate to the growth in a very real way, in the sense that these people are not familiar with the term of the growth or either the whole political arguments behind the growth, as in, you know, planetary boundaries, etc. But the way that they have been functioning for most of their lives is pretty much the definition of the growth. So in that sense, we don't really need to be pushing towards that direction. It's rather organic, and that's the good aspect of it. But overall, yeah, our political engagement in those terms, it is from not local initiatives and organizations, etc. Yeah.
So would you say there's a certain kind of politics embedded in this particular technology or in makerspaces as such?
The ones that we're researching, for sure, yeah. A makerspace is a pretty broad term.
Sure.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Billy, but the type of work we're doing here and the people that we're collaborating, yes, the technology quite clearly carries those political ambitions. So we won't reject someone's proposal to develop a certain tool for a certain, let's say, most of the tools are for organic agriculture, but if someone would want to develop a tool that's not for that and it's for larger types of agricultural activity, you wouldn't be able to do it in that type of setting, right? Mm-hmm. So it's sort of by definition geared towards certain directions that carry certain politics, if that makes sense.
Yeah, because it sort of fosters small communities and small organizations, if we could even say that. Yeah. Great, cool. Are there any more questions for Vasilis and Chris and no? Otherwise, I'm sure we can come back to your presentation and your paper in the final round of plenum discussions. Thank you very much. That was super interesting and and engaging and right on the topic. So thanks a lot. Okay, so moving on to Linnea, who is a research assistant and master student here at Copenhagen Business School. And she will tell us something about the GameStop affair. So, Linnea, whenever you're ready, you go ahead.
All right. What do you see right now?
Ourselves. Now your presentation.
All right, perfect. That's a very hard presentation to follow. I feel mine is much more silly and preliminary, but I'll do my best to sort of decode some of the language. So as Emil explained, I'm gonna try to, well, my aim today is sort of more to tell a story of what happened in January and February. If you have read the note that I submitted for the conference, you'll get an idea that this is sort of, the work I've done so far has been very data heavy. You might choose to think of it as sort of a preliminary ethnography. And I think from there you can move on to different kinds of analyses, but I'll get further into that. All right, so I made a short little overview, and just so you know, there's going to be a couple memes and videos throughout this presentation, so I hope they won't go completely over your head. I'll try to explain some of them. But if you have any particular questions, please feel free to ask them, and I'll incorporate it during the presentation. All right, so first of all, I'm going to very, very briefly explain some of the main actors that were involved. And then I'm going to sort of move into why you should care about something that happened on a pretty obscure internet forum and their chaotic tendencies. Then I have a very rough timeline of some of the main events. A lot of things happened. A lot of people covered the events. So there's inevitably going to be some stuff that I'm going to leave out, but I tried to summarize the most important points. And I'll use that timeline to sort of talk about a couple takeaways and the most important developments that happened during the process. And then a first attempt at a sort of theoretical analysis, an anarchist approach to what happened. We're going to ask ourselves if the apes actually are anarchists. And then lastly, I'm going to talk a little bit about future research. All right, let's get into it. First of all, Reddit, if you're not familiar, is a news and discussion website. They have a whole bunch of different subforums, and one particular subforum is Wall Street Bets. Wall Street Bets contains a collective of apes, as they call each other, which I will also be calling them because it's much shorter than saying retail investors on Wall Street Bets. They usually discuss investments in a language that's very similar to the type you'd hear at a casino, hence the name, Bets on Wall Street. They have a very specific and very developed culture with a very specific sort of language that you need to understand in order to understand what's going on. Most of it takes place in the form of memes and other types of content creation, for example, videos. I'm going to show a couple videos right after this. Another player is GameStop. It's a US-based game retailer. I think it's actually the biggest one globally. Most importantly, it's listed on the New York Stock Exchange as GME. And then there's Robinhood, which you might know. It's one of the biggest investment apps in the US. It was started by two former Stanford graduates who allegedly started it to sort of democratize the stock market and eliminate the barriers to investing by actually making it free. The things that you give up in order to make it free are a bit more interesting, but I don't have time to get into that now. Lastly, there are the hedge funds, which of course are investment companies who mostly aim to sort of maximize results. Some of the most crucial ones in this case has been Melvin Capital and Citron Capital. But we'll look into that after. All right, then I have a couple videos. All of these are taken directly from Wall Street Bets. And even if you don't understand the sort of in culture, I hope they'll give you a look into how they talk to each other. Here's the first one. I have 3. All right, think of that what you will. It's the second one. No sound. All right, last one. Pretty interesting example. You notice the Lamborghini just threw out some trash on the road, and the Wall Street Bets is supposedly throwing the trash directly into the Lamborghini afterwards. All right, then I have a little bit of a scenario because there's some very interesting behavioral patterns on the subreddit or the subforum. So I'd like to actually use the live reactions on Teams after I introduce this tiny little scenario. All right, so imagine you're an ape on Wall Street Bets that is a member of the community. It's January 27th this year, and you've actually bought into GME. You invested like $10,000 into it, but now you're seeing all sorts of news coverage. Everyone is saying, all established media houses in the US is saying it's going to crash completely as soon as it peaks. You don't know when it's going to peak, but all of your friends on Wall Street Bets are telling you that you need to hold. So what do? Either you go paper hands, which means you sell all of your stock at the first sign of a risk. And you think to yourself, okay, at least I got a little bit out of it, because as long as you invested before January 27th, you probably gained a little bit. Or you go diamond hands all the way, which means that you hold no matter what. And maybe you'll even try to hold until it hits $1,000, which hasn't happened yet, but you never know. All right, so try to use the live reactions, either let's do the thumbs up for paper hands and then the laughing thing for diamond hands. We'll see how that works out. All right, can I even see the reactions? Emil, can you see the reactions?
Yeah, I think there are more thumbs up, I think, than laughing smileys.
Interesting. All right, that's kind of what I think.
Of the ephemera community. No.
All right, that makes sense. So risk aversion, of course. But let's see what actually happened then. All right, first of all, let's just talk about why this is actually important to care about, even from a professional standpoint. First of all, once you understand the language, and I try to decode a lot of the slang in the note I submitted, but once you understand it, you see that a very different story has been portrayed by the community itself. They tell it as sort of a David versus Goliath kind of thing, whereas a lot of the media has told the story in terms of the chaotic uprisings versus the organized, legitimate, and secure organization of Wall Street. Also, the fact that it happens on Reddit, which is a democratized and very instant platform, means that we have direct access into what the community is actually talking about. It also means that they actually respond to the media coverage almost immediately, and typically do pretty thorough discussions about what they think is correct and what the media got wrong. So a lot of different perspectives that we actually have available publicly. Secondly, there was a very obvious shift of motive during the process. It started out, the people that bought into GME started out only being interested in gambling, but at some point they started becoming very explicitly activists. And this is where the sort of theoretical potentials come in, because it does have some pretty interesting applications to anarchist theory, and it might provide a sort of case study or an example of how you can approach activist organization online, or how it can happen completely accidentally and still be pretty interesting. So I think all in all, it just means that it's a very well documented case. It shows how a community can come together even though they didn't mean to. And since there's a lot of different actors involved and a lot of things happen, there's a pretty large gap for some theoretical analysis, no matter what sort of discipline you're attached to. All right, timeline. First of all, at some point before 2019, a bunch of the large hedge funds started shorting the GME stock very heavily. And just in case you don't know, shorting effectively means that you're betting against the market. So you're saying if you short GME stock, you're saying that you're betting that the company is going to crash. And that's what they believed. But then in summer 2019, the user on Wall Street Bets named Deep Fucking Value posted that he had YOLO'd, which is short for you only live once, and they use it as sort of an expression of reckless investment decisions. He'd put $53,000 into GME stock. It's not pocket money. Then fast forward quite a bit, January 21st, the apes on Wall Street Bets. I'm not sure why, and it's a little bit hard to pinpoint exactly the date that this happened, but all of the apes start buying GME en masse. And then skip forward a couple of days, news come out that hedge funds who had actually shorted the stock had already lost $6 billion. Whether or not this amount is technically correct or what exactly went on, not necessarily important, but it's rather a reflection that the hedge funds were definitely hurting, and they definitely felt the effects of what was happening. Very soon after that, mainstream media starts talking about meme stocks, which you might have heard of. GameStop is one of them, the main one, then there's a couple other ones. And then on January 28th, things really start taking off. Wall Street Bets grows. It was about 2 million people, 2 million members before all this happened. I think as of this morning, it was 10 million, pretty substantial. It had already grown a lot by January 28th. And more importantly, GME actually skyrockets completely from $76 to $500 at its very peak. And then, right as the peak is happening, Robinhood, the investment app, decides to completely halt all purchases of meme stocks, which effectively freezes the price or potentially decreases it. And the apes go completely insane on the forum. It's very interesting to see the kind of discussions that were posted. They completely turn on Robinhood, which used to be a sort of democratized platform and an easy entry into investing. But this is where what I termed the sort of anti-establishment turn begins, where the real stuff starts getting interesting. And then as all of the apes go completely crazy, they start creating an uproar. They file class action lawsuits against Robinhood. Some of the large financial institutions start to strike back, especially the hedge funds, because they claim that the apes and specifically meme stocks pose a very, very dangerous threat to the stock market, because they could delegitimize or sort of disrupt everything that they've built for so long and sort of ruin the economy. That's basically what they said. And then, as sort of a little bit of a side story, the mainstream media actually starts publishing a bunch of articles about that apes are shifting their focus into buying silver, and starts explaining how the culture on Wall Street Bets is so sexist and exclusionary and racist even. And then fast forward a little bit to one of our other pretty big main events. This is where things kind of get official, because the US House Committee on Financial Services actually hosts a virtual hearing on the short squeeze of GME. The CEO of Robinhood participates, Deep Fucking Value participates, a bunch of other very big players on the financial market participate and discuss what happened. And if Deep Fucking Value was not a complete icon for the movement before, he definitely becomes almost sanctified during this virtual hearing. And then sort of since then, a lot of stuff has happened. If you read the note, you'll see some of the details, but basically in March, April, May, the apes don't sell. The price goes down a little bit, but it continues to sort of fluctuate around $200. Right now it's like $220, but it has been 100 and something, and kind of steadily, slowly rising over the course of the past couple months. We'll see what happens. All right, the most important takeaways. First of all, it's very, very interesting how the movement actually completely pivoted from being reckless gambling, as is pretty much business as usual on Wall Street Bets, to very purposeful anti-establishment organizing. It's kind of hard to pinpoint exactly why the sentiment changed, but it seemed to happen sort of concurrently with the media coverage started skyrocketing, because a lot of the apes started speculating that mainstream media, they started coming up with all sorts of links between mainstream media companies and hedge funds, which led them to say that this is why the media is sort of pushing pro-establishment propaganda and sort of saying the public is against us, all that kind of sentiment. Interestingly, also, Wall Street Bets saw a huge influx of bots who started spamming the discussions. The moderators had to censor a lot of it, and there was complete chaos because it seemed that their community had completely been overtaken by bots. Also, perhaps more interestingly, especially in relation to the fact that we have data on everything that the apes are discussing, in many instances, the coverage or the stories that the media put out did not have any empirical basis in the online community. Believe me, I've gone through a lot of it. A lot of the stuff they said about purchase of silver and other stocks, did not seem to have any basis at all in the discussions that were taking place. The stuff they said about sexist culture also did not seem to have any grounds. In fact, there was a lot of discussions about that afterwards because they got very mad that the media was trying to sort of delegitimize them. And perhaps most importantly, actually, a lot of the stories that came out sort of described the apes, a little bit ironically since they call themselves the apes, but they described them as complete financial idiots that just took a completely disinformed approach to retail investing and therefore were dangerous to the stock market. Whether or not that's true, I'm not exactly certain, but we'll see. All right, and most crucially, the organization that happened actually almost perfectly fits Colin Ward's idea of optimal anarchist organization. In the beginning, it was small-ish. It was definitely spontaneous. It was effective or functional and temporary or voluntary. And here's a couple examples of the first one on the left is the fratty, the sexist culture that the Lily, which I believe is under the Washington Post, talked about. The next one is a news story about how the retail traders were shifting to silver. And then there's another post about Redditors setting their sights on silver after GameStop frenzy. All right. Now the big question. Does this mean that the apes are actually anarchists? Maybe without saying it explicitly. So far, I've mainly dealt with collecting a lot of data. So we'll see how well this actually fits once it gets more established. But definitely to start with, one thing was it actually started off as a pretty small forum. They were sort of mocked on other subforums on Reddit for being very, very specific and they did not really mingle with anyone else, or a very specific little subset of the community. Suddenly it grew to a completely enormous size, but the group actually dispersed quite a bit through a couple of different offshoots of different forums and stuff, which brings us to our next point. It was very much temporary. The community was most heavily concentrated right during the short squeeze of late January. And also a lot of the subforums that were created were only dedicated to specific parts of it and created sort of many sub-communities within the big community. And it has sort of dispersed since then, but there's still a little bit of traction within most of the actual dedicated apes. All right, and then in terms of voluntary, Wall Street Bets is an open forum. A lot of the discussion happened without any overt action to take down hedge funds until they got longer into the process. And people can opt out as soon as they want. There's no commitment, there's no ties, no anything, except for the culture. Lastly, functionality. Surprisingly, they actually did create a short squeeze, and it had spillover effects to other stocks on the market. For example, AMC, which they also another meme stock. Cryptocurrencies went up. They also started the congressional hearing on market manipulation. Very interestingly, a whole bunch of new investors got involved in trading stocks and also grew the number of apes exponentially. But that means a lot of new people that are actually on the stock market now thanks to what happened. Also, it created awareness and discussion regarding possible blatant manipulation in the stock market. And sort of in line with this, it also started a lot of discussion, especially on Wall Street Bets, but also in the media and a lot of the stories I've seen on sort of mainstream public sites about wealth distribution and the false hopes that are perpetuated by the establishment that you can get rich off of day trading and all those sorts of American dream kind of myths. And lastly, the apes actually made a lot of very conscious efforts to sort of differentiate themselves from Wall Street interests. They started adopting gorillas their sort of mascot, from Diane Fossey's fund. They started donating Nintendo Switches to hospitals. In general, there's a lot of posts on there about people donating and getting involved in all kinds of things that more exhibit socialist or anti-capitalist values. Pretty interesting. All right.
Okay, Linnea, just I'm assuming you're approaching the end here, so just if you could round it off, that would be great.
No problem. This is my last slide.
Cool.
All right. So to finish it off quickly, I have a couple ideas for further data collection. There's already a bunch of articles on SSRN, working papers and stuff. I'm not familiar with anything that's been peer reviewed yet, but I have a feeling it's only a matter of time. Personally, I think it would be very interesting to do a survey of the age distribution and the risk exposure, how many GME stocks they actually bought among the apes. It might also be interesting to do interviews with them to sort of get into their personal motives behind participating, and then you can sort of start talking about why the mood actually shifted. And then to sort of create a little bit of ideas in the community. If you want to write about GameStop, you're more than welcome to. I'd be happy to be a source of data. So here's a couple ideas for stuff you can get into. There could be something about generational perspectives on the YOLO economy, which is the you only live once economy, which sort of exemplifies very nihilist approaches to investment, maybe fueled by financial crises. It's definitely worth looking into. And in relation to the scenario I presented, there's something about behavioral economics that you might want to look into in relation to the complete lack of risk aversion among apes. We're not exactly certain why this is the case. It's pretty certain that not all of them are rich. So anyways, there's also an opportunity for a feminist analysis on the actual lack of sexist culture on something that is typically extremely sexist. They actually go as far as to ridicule hypermasculine culture on Wall Street. It almost seems like satire. And then lastly, there could be something in relation to what Emil and Erik actually talked about yesterday in relation to prefiguration. However, this stands in pretty clear contrast to what they were talking about in relation to prepping, because it is very political, and it also insinuates that the apes feel like they have a sort of responsibility for the future. All right.
Thanks a lot, Linnea. That was very interesting and very insightful, and as you said, data rich or data heavy. I can't remember which term you used, but let's say it was data rich. Thanks a lot. Any questions for Linnea at this point?
Can I unshare my screen?
I could start by asking, like, Linnea, so you seem to imply that this could tells us something about sort of the future of activism or technology-mediated activism. Could you say something about sort of what does this phenomenon represent, in a sense? Sort of, does it represent a tendency or a new form of activism that might be worth looking into?
I think it definitely shows that there's a potential within internet culture in general to sort of more easily deviate from public opinion. And it seems that I think a lot of people actually underestimate how much you can get done through an online forum. So there's definitely a space for a new kind of activism that only happens through internet forums. Not saying that this hasn't happened before, but it does seem that the potential of it has sort of skyrocketed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, cool. And I see that Marco has got a question.
Yeah, hi. I really like the presentation. I really like the subject. I was trying to get to understand GameStop when it happened. I didn't manage too much because, like, I mean, the financial kind of language, like, is not always easy to grasp, especially if you're an outsider. I was one of the voted for the diamond hands. Like, I would have definitely got like to stay, but that doesn't really matter. I discussed this issue of GameStop like with another researcher from Italy. So his paper is in Italian. Like I can translate it maybe, and he was like trying to make the argument that finance has become like from an anthropological perspective a sort of tribal war. And I mean, like the fact that they call themselves apes, which I didn't know, it definitely matches the idea, like that they create a tribe on their own and they fight to bring down the other tribes, basically. And there is nothing else after that. I mean, like even the YOLO bet of like I just put $53,000 like on that, which to me is like is an amount that is like almost double my salary, but like my annual salary, but. I found it really interesting because like it's a similar mechanism that you find like even in big investors. You have the case of Archegos recently, the guy that lost like $10 billion within one day, basically creating a massive financial loss to Credit Suisse and another big hedge fund, I can't remember. How do you, I mean, like, rather than being like just an anarchist, how do you feel about this anthropological reading of a tribal war between like this tribe against other tribes, if it makes sense to you?
It makes perfect sense. I could very easily see that. I think that's also why I approached it as sort of an ethnographical study to begin with, to sort of get an idea of the actual culture that's in there. What's interesting about it is that also, as you mentioned, the fact that they describe themselves as apes, they almost have the gorilla mascot. They also use chimpanzees sometimes, but it's definitely great ape culture. They also have a bunch of different slang that's very specific to their community. So I think in general, it does seem like they have created a tribe and started a sort of a fight against the more established organized tribe. So I could definitely see that. I think it would be very interesting to go more anthropological on it and see what you can find.
Thank you so much. Great question. So given that you sort of that you can sort of make this tribal analysis of the Reddit subforum here, and also the fact that you sort of imply that it sort of matches an anarchist description of what or an anarchist ideal of organization. Do you think of the GameStop incident as sort of a progressive thing, as something that sort of, is it a model for alternatives, something worth promoting politically, or yeah?
I think that's sort of where it gets difficult, because I also tried to point out with describing it as not necessarily intentional activism, but rather completely accidental. So how do you foster accidental activism within other people? That's not really something that you can replicate. But you might take it as a sort of learning opportunity to the potentials that it can carry, even though you can't necessarily foster new movements like that.
Yeah.
I think what carried it a lot of the way was that there was no explicit intention to sort of start anything to begin with. It happened more as a reaction to how the media was covering it, or how everyone else was telling the story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Any more questions for Linnea at this point? Otherwise, I think we'll skip ahead in the program to the final presentation by Vangelis Brakoteris. I'm sorry about the horrible pronunciation here. Are you present? Yes, indeed.
Yes, I do.
Great, thanks a lot. And if my Googling is correct, you're from the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki. Is that correct? Yep.
Indeed.
Welcome, and as soon as you're ready, please go ahead, and if you have a presentation, share your screen. Otherwise, just start presenting.
Thank you. Just to know, even Greek people have difficulty in pronouncing my surname.
Okay, I'm very pleased to hear that.
I know it's tricky. So, just give me 1 second to share my screen.
Yep. Yep.
Is it okay?
Yeah.
So, good evening to all of you. We are really glad for participating in your conference and especially in this panel, as we're sure that a really substantial and useful conversation is going to take place, and also after the presentation part. My name is Vangelis. I am a PhD candidate in the School of Spatial Planning and Development in the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki. I will present you the bibliographic research we conducted in collaboration with my supervising professor, Giorgos Gritzas, titled Community Economies, Community-Based Manufacturing and Technology Issues in Generation of New Commons, the Case of Recuperated Enterprises. Also, this presentation has a lot in common with the first one made by Vasilis. In this survey, a literature review was carried out on highlighting the key features of recuperated enterprises, connecting with the dimension of the space and investigation of its role in the viability of the recuperated enterprises and the development of ecosystems of alternative economies based on them. Furthermore, basic element was the approach of recuperated enterprises as commons due to the creation of broader self-institutionalized communities during the process of recuperation, and the approach of recuperated enterprises from the perspective of community economies. By combining also the approaches of the commons and the community economies, this presentation seeks to focus on how recuperated enterprises could operate as community-based manufacturing paradigms by utilizing commons-based technologies. In parallel, the question that emerges is if the recuperation process could lead to the generation of new commons, where the final consumers or users could also be involved in surplus management as members of an enlarged community. What do we mean with the term recuperated enterprises? We refer to bankrupt companies passed in the management of their employees either through acquisition or through the occupation of the means of production, mainly in times of economic and social crisis. The business activity starts again without the involvement of the previous management. The workers of recuperated enterprise, having gone beyond the criticism of the capitalist system, have succeeded in constructing a different present based on meeting their own needs. This is also the policy of collective action, which, according to the post-structuralist approach, refers to the collective effort to build another economic reality, a process in which it is not the aim of the legislative implementation of a pre-planned model, but the emergence of the possibilities that this effort can give birth to. There are subjects involved in this transformative process, which must eliminate from the self the logics and feelings of capitalism and approach in a different way, and approach actually differently the way in which they are anti-capitalists. The workers of the recuperated enterprises have taken the decisive steps of changing themselves, simply stopping to resist the present system and claim from a superior structure, overcoming this logic of making the criticism. They have managed to build a different present based on meeting their own needs. The most common way of organization for a recuperated enterprise is the one of workers' cooperative. A worker cooperative with its members and also with its rules of governance can also be characterized as a commons according to the relevant literature. This is because the employees of the cooperative who construct the community see the surplus generated as a product of collective effort, which is shared among those who create it, based on the rules that the workers have already set. Also, according to Gibson-Graham's criteria, access to the property is widely shared. The community members have a say in its use. Any benefit that arises is shared in the community. The care of the property and any responsibility on it is entrusted to members of the community. According also to another approach, commons are defined as a democratic organization of productive and reproductive work, where the workplace is transformed into a common resource. Work itself is transformed into a practice of commoning, and the produced surplus is transformed into common health. The development and sustainability of intangible and material resources is managed in collective terms, and in this context, social relations are reproduced between members of the community, which can be called commoners, as well between societies and commonly produced goods. Like the specialities of any workplace, the degree of contact between workplaces and their wider communities is crucial. Existing relationships between employees and those involved in the recuperated enterprises throughout the neighborhood community and other sites are central to the sustainability of these projects. What can we say for sure is that the phenomenon of recuperated enterprises could not even exist without the support of local communities. And what we mean about that is that broader communities consisting of families, young people, artists, solidarity supporters strengthen the effort of employees by providing moral and material protection to them. Therefore, community-based economic activities can create a social basis for the dissemination and preparation of alternative ways of structuring social production, independent as much as it could be of private capital. In such a context, we can consider how the two-way interaction relationship between recuperated enterprises and the broader community can lead to the management of such an enterprise as a commons, with joint resource management and a collectively institutionalized operating framework, with the view to formulating an alternative business planning proposal based on the needs of the community. One of the general objectives of this research is to understand whether possibilities can be created through the encouragement, empowerment, and proliferation of alternative spaces which offer multiple ways of participating, exploiting resources, working, producing, and distributing surplus. Such post-development version, which is a set of alternatives, is the community economies, describes as a set of alternatives to resource utilization. And it is a term that Gibson-Graham introduced to describe the creation of new approaches to how we perceive life and work in general. The concept of surplus, which, as we can see, is used as opposed to profit in the capitalist market, plays a central role in the community economies. This is because in the community economies, the surplus is produced by safe and fair working relationships. It is distributed in a way that contributes to social and ecological well-being, while its distribution is decided in a democratic way. In the context of community economies, it is argued that the community should be the result of the process and not its basis. So the community is not defined in relation to a space or region, but as a social formation with a shared identity and a set of institutions and values which is not a given, but it is formed through the process of commoning. An alternative way of organizing production and consumption in an alternative economic system, as the one described, the recuperated enterprises, requires also the use of another type of technology. According to the relative bibliography, the emergence of a novel social productive model such as the commons-based peer production takes place in completely different terms from profit-oriented industrial production. Except for its application in the fields of information, commons-based peer production also extends to physical manufacturing and conjugates with desktop manufacturing, contributing to the formation of the model that you also described before in the first presentation of design global and manufacture local. This model paves the way for alternative paths of social organization and bridges digital and knowledge commons with existing physical infrastructure and the growth communities, achieving distributed modes of collaborative production. The aforementioned, now turning back to the previous discussion, the aforementioned collective and community practices aim at reorganizing shared life, infrastructure, and social benefits, creating possibilities for the birth of new forms of production and wealth management. Such networks create an area quite autonomous from the capitalist market. The social power that creates and sustains the ecology of the commons, as an active social economy network, or even initiatives between different communities aim at meeting basic needs of the community and are created through a kind of commoning that crosses borders or activates and maintains relationships between different communities and thus gives shape to the commons on a larger scale by penetrating social spaces and making the presence of the common within them more intense. In the debate on recuperated enterprises so far, we have found that recuperated enterprises have a number of characteristics which form the basis for procedures of. We believe that this debate could also be linked to the approximation of community economies and that we can move forward with the debate on the possibility of having a community-based manufacturing production. In fact, depending on the type of product produced and the technology being shared, the consumer could also be a part of that community. Here, a couple of slides about the literature review, the resources used. And I would like to thank you very much for your interest and patience.
Thank you very much. Right, so there's an annoying echo on my microphone. Anyhow, has anyone got any questions for Vangelis at this point? Yes, Katja?
Yes, thanks a lot. I find it also extremely interesting, the connection of the commons and linking to the presentation earlier by Vasilis and colleagues to the recuperated enterprises. So another very important phenomenon. I would like to maybe ask you to kind of, what is the landscape of recuperated enterprises in Greece, but also beyond, because of course the case of Viome is very much known, but what other kind of spaces there are that operate this way, and also, in which ways they are organized and how many, let's say, are organized in a way which is close to what you have articulated here.
Mm-hmm. Can I answer now or to wait also?
Yeah, sure, please. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you for this question. Of course, Viome is a well-known example of a recuperated enterprise. However, it remains the only one all over Greece. The networking is in two levels. The first one locally with a lot of other initiatives of social economy, social solidarity economy, and the other collectives of working collectives actually, and also with plenty of other political organizations and similar initiatives, let's say. However, there's a second level of networking and organizing which has to do with the international network of recuperated enterprises. In Europe, there are not a lot of paradigms. However, worldwide, and especially in Latin America and in Argentina, there are quite a lot. And there has been a lot of connection all of these years, participating together in international conferences, trying to build networks more functional in terms of distribution of products or in terms of how to communicate with each other. But there is still a lot of work to be done.
All right, thank you. Other questions? Something that I grapple with and that I've been sort of grappling with throughout all the presentations that we've had in this session is the question of sort of whether there's sort of a political agenda that's inherent to a particular technology or a particular organizational setup. So I was wondering, do you think that sort of recuperated enterprises always lend themselves to sort of progressive ends, or is it only when employing sort of commons-based technology that this progressive element is sort of integrated into the recuperated enterprises? Or is there no such thing as an inherent politics to recuperated enterprises? Is it all dependent on the workers who then sort of own or take over the enterprise? Could you expand a little bit on that?
I'm not sure if I understood the question because I have some difficulties in my sound. You ask if it is all this action of recuperating enterprises is connected to a political background, let's say?
Yeah.
Okay. The truth is not only in the case of Greece or Europe, but also in Argentina, as far as I know. For example, in Argentina, there are 4 different big groups of 4 different federations of recuperated enterprises. There is one that are more intended to Trotskyism. There are some others that are right-wing, and there are some others more close to an anarchistic way of view. Okay. Also in Greece and in Europe, that I know better, there was never a political background in order to motivate all this. Recuperated enterprises in general come as a result of need. So there is no a manifestation of some political principles and values that lead to the occupation or to the acquisition of the enterprise. There's always the need, for the right, as they say, to work, and also they realize that by this situation of a political or social crisis, economic or social crisis that I referred in the beginning, that a more radical way of working without someone that could be a boss could also be something that could work. However, they are, of course, connected in the majority to not so specific, but a more general area of policy of politics that has to do with more progressive people, with left-wing people and all this, because they are the ones that from the beginning are forming something like a community of support. And so this interaction that I also referred in the presentation has a result also for the workers to make, how to say, a reframing of their way of thinking, more or less in this direction, a more progressive, let's say, direction, and all this.
So what would it take, you think, for recuperated enterprises to sort of create a movement that would actually, as the title of the sub-theme implies, create social change through technology? Would that be sort of a possible scenario in the future, that we see sort of a more sort of coherent political movement of these enterprises?
I don't think that this is easy to be answered about how we can see the future and the political movement on this, because also recuperated enterprises exist for lots of years now. The first examples, the first initiatives of this new form of recuperation started in 2001. In the economic crisis in Argentina, in a very massive way, and still exists. And there is a continuous, a perpetual, let's say, action of change, and also the political spirit also is in this action. And also, I don't know. I can't answer that if this plan, let's say, with the new kind of technology implemented, may have a potential to this direction. I don't think this is something that I could support according to the literature review that I have conducted.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you too.
Anyone has any final questions for Vangelis? Yeah, Katja, again.
Yes, so you mentioned that the recuperated enterprises, the existing examples, they often come as a result of a need. So then I wonder what can be done so that they come possibly as a result of strategy or some sort of organizing tactics.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really nice question, because I used to work in Viome for 4 years, and this was a concept always as a part of a general conversation of the strategy. First of all, creating a very functional and stable network of recuperated enterprises, not only regional but also around the world, is a very first step in this direction, because this network has to be really functional and so be attractive for people, not to become just an exception to the rule, but to become, let's say, the rule, or to exist in a more massive way. Furthermore, the connection with the community at any level is really important. If there is an existing successful paradigm which also interacts with the local community or with a broader community, this interaction could lead to people that constitute this community to think in a different way, and so each one in their workplaces try to set these arguments about why not to work as in a self-managed way. And actually, in Greece, that I'm sure about that, latest years there are a lot of projects, a lot of different initiatives, a lot of cooperatives that are being organized and functioning in a more radical way than in the past. They are not recuperated enterprises, however, they always support this notion of self-management, which is in common in these projects. And I think if with a bit of more of patience and a lot of more of organization, it could be something that could occur not only as a part of a need and not only in periods of economic and social crisis.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks also for a very nice paper session. I think we had some good discussions and some very nice presentations, and I thought that there were certain themes that seemed to sort of recur across the three presentations. It seemed to me that in all instances, the technology somehow afforded a type of organization or gathering or something like that, that in a sense accidentally or only afterwards at least became political. But that was never sort of the intention, both in the case of GameStop and in case of the makerspaces and the recuperated enterprises. So it's not sort of the intention to necessarily launch a political project, but that was something that was sort of attributed backwards. But thanks also for the rich empirical details. That's always very interesting. Sometimes these conference presentations are sort of lost to abstract, elaborate, theoretical simulacra. And sometimes it's just nice to actually hear something from people who have been into the field and know something about the empirical stuff. So that was very rewarding, I think. Unless someone has comments that go across or questions, we have 5 more minutes to do that. But if not, I think we'll just allow ourselves a bit longer break than what was planned. Yusra, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the what remains of this conference is the closing panel, which starts at 4. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yep. About activism through education, I think it is. Yeah. And so hope to see some of you there, or all of you. And thanks again for this nice paper presentation, and thanks for the presenters. That was very, very rewarding to listen to. See you out there, and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
For sharing. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much.